The golf swing uses two unequal hands. They have different jobs and different levels of skill. And so it's best to train them individually. Now, the club head's too heavy to swing with one hand. So we hold the other end of the golf club. And here's how to do it. You hold the wrong end of the club in the shaft. You don't hold the head. And you do it as if you're sort of fencing with somebody who's small. And you don't touch the ground. You hover it above the ground. And you form the golf swing by turning the shoulders as if they're a lid on a cylinder. Your body's the cylinder. And you do it with the right shoulder lower and the elbow looking down toward your hip. It doesn't have to be touching, but keep it in that shape. And keep it that way, looking down all through as you turn your shoulders like a lid on a cylinder, and allow the wrist to hinge so that the club ends up across the back of your shoulders. Now, you may lift the left heel off the ground a little bit, but do keep your eye looking down toward where the imaginary ball would be. You're not going to hit the ground, but look in that direction. And then as you swing through, you make a whoosh. And your right side will follow through where the toe pirouettes up. And that right shoulder, which was lower than the left one at address, as we described the original position, continues to be lower than the left one. And at that point, you maybe have a look of perfection on the face with one eyebrow raised for the cameras. The rhythm is one and whoosh. Okay, then we swap hands and do the less good hand. It's quite different from the right hand. First of all, again gripping in the fingers, you turn the entirety of the arm and the hand over so that the elbow is looking out at the target and you can't see the tips of your fingers. And this shoulder is, of course, higher than this one at address. You're not going to hit the ground, but you're going to turn the shoulders again like a lid on a cylinder, and you're going to hinge the wrist, but you keep this arm extended all the way through the backswing and the downswing. It only bends as it wraps around your neck with the right shoulder lower again and the right foot pirouetted. And the rhythm is again one and whoosh. And then you try both hands. So we start with the left one. You turn the elbow and the hand over, and then you attach the other hand down below it. Now, it's too thin to do a great job with that. Just do what you can. And then you'll think you're going to be twice as powerful, twice as loud a whoosh. You'll be somewhat disappointed that you're doing very well if you get the same noise with two hands that you were able to get with one. So it's one and whoosh. Hold the follow through, look good for the cameras. That's the basic golf swing. Welcome, friends, to my Abject Beginner's Guide to Playing Golf. I entitle it that way because that's exactly how the game feels when you first start. It's so incredibly difficult that it's hard to believe that anyone can become competent at it. The purpose of this series of lessons is going to be to take somebody who'd like to surreptitiously learn how to play golf in a sort of clandestine way, so that you can emerge like a butterfly from the chrysalis and surprise all your friends and amaze your and confound your enemies. And so it will include things like the history of the game so that you understand a little about how the game emerged, the rules, equipment, obviously techniques about how to swing and hit all the different shots that golf requires, perhaps even about how to stand and where to stand for safety, how to dress. Everything that you can imagine that might be a mystery to somebody who hasn't played the game or been around people who play. And so join me on this, in this. I think it's going to be fun. Practice these swings daily because you're building familiarity and balance and probably strength and range of movement. And the picture we're trying to draw essentially is like the spokes of a wagon wheel that's sitting on the line where the ball is sitting toward the target and leaning on the wall behind one. And so the club is sort of the spokes of that. And that's the formula that we're trying to develop. Sometimes I describe it as a windshield wiper blade as well. And you can imagine what movement would be most compliant with that idea. Then we have to get the club to the ground, and with two hands and with the heavy end of the club. And there's a process through which I want you to go. Your arms, when you hang them to your side, usually hang with the thumbs turned in slightly. You see some people who are taller and more slender who occasionally have the hands looking toward the legs. You don't see anybody standing like this. So this is a very natural posture with the thumbs turned in. It turns out to be quite a valuable resource because if you simply rest the club between your feet here, sloping across your knee, and hold it with your left hand, just letting it hang to your side, grip it in the fingers with the thumb slightly right of center, you've just found out how to hold the club with your left hand. Very important. And the idea is to grip in such a way that if this were a rope and you were having a sort of one-handed tug of war with somebody, that your grip would feel like it's capable of that. We don't grip it like a fist. That doesn't match the task of a tug of war. So having gripped down here, you then pick up the club. Now you don't have to lift it all the way up here. You just want the lower arm clear of your body. The upper arm can remain touching. And then you attach the other hand, making sure that you haven't let the arm turn this way again. You keep it the way I've described with the elbow looking out. You attach the other hand by hooking the middle two fingers around, butted up against the left forefinger, cover the thumb in the pocket made down the palm of the right hand, and form a figure Y with the forefinger and thumb. There's a V with a stick on it. And with the little finger, you wrap it around the knuckle of your forefinger. Some golfers interlock it. I always found it a little uncomfortable. And if you have small hands, just put all 10 fingers on the club. Then extend and bias your arm. Now, what is bias? It means to turn the elbow out, as I've already described, with the shoulder higher than the other one. And because of that bias, you'll notice that the club has drifted over here in front of my right foot. Well, that's not usually where the ball is. It's more in front of my left shoulder. And so without changing the arms in any way, just simply relocate the club so that it's more compatible with the ball position. I call that rectifying the club. And then finally, you look to see if the club face is what they call square. Square is where the lines on the face and the bottom edge of the club are essentially vertical in front of you. That would mean that they're in fact perpendicular to the target line. If they're not, there's an open club face, for example, something that'll come up in other conversations. You simply twiddle it around your fingers until it is gripped vertically. You don't turn the hands and arms. We've already got them right. Now, keeping your arms the way I described, where the upper arm is touching your body, but the lower arm is not, and remember the left shoulder is higher than the right, you're going to tip over. And this is where your posture is developed. As we tip over, the golf club goes down, of course, but it also goes inward. And when it gets to the top of an imaginary golf ball, let's say a couple of inches above the ground, you then find, well, your legs are straight, and of course, no sport's played well like that. So you then use your knees to drop down. And it's very important that you don't then change the posture of your body. You drop your head and your tailbone down vertically, and you'll notice that the bottom of the club is not flat on the ground. We tend to think that that's logically appropriate, but in fact, it'll be slightly toe up, particularly if the clubs fit you correctly. And then just to start the process of learning what is called a waggle, just clean a little piece of that windshield wiper or windshield by moving the club back and forth. And that is giving you an early insight into how to confirm that you're standing correctly and getting the right distance from the ball and maintaining these shapes. And also, very importantly, how to initiate the backswing, which we'll talk about when we get to hitting golf shots. Once you've done a few of those practice swings with two hands, we start to contemplate the task of taking this to the grass. That's where the ball is. And so I'll talk with more detail about how to prepare in a moment, on another video, in fact. But first we tip over and then crouch, and the club is now lightly, the thin end, lightly touching the grass. Look for some thicker grass because it's a little helpful. And then you're going to do the same one and whoosh. And can you brush the grass in front of your face, but not gouge in front of your right foot or miss completely? Bad news, those last two are the more easy ones to do, but we want to brush the grass in front of our face and do it with regularity. The game originated along the coast of Scotland, and there's a comparatively narrow, but of course very long strip of land that separates the cultivatable land from the beach that was long before golf came along called the link land. You've heard the term golf links. Well, that's the link land. And it's sort of unique in the world because there are relatively few places in the world where you could hit a small ball across country and actually go find it again. This happens because of the husbandry, not just the topography, to be one of those rare places. Why I say husbandry is because it was used, since it wasn't any good for growing crops, for grazing sheep and cattle. And particularly the sheep would cut the grass quite short. And it would therefore leave these large expanses of green, of short grass open to hit a ball cross country. And so being a narrow strip of land, the golf courses would be one hole after another going along the coast. And then when you got all the way to the end of, say, 9 holes, it wasn't 18 at the beginning of golf many years ago, then you'd be the farthest on the 10th tee from the clubhouse, and then you'd turn around and go back in. And because it's that narrow strip of land and they needed to conserve land and use it effectively, several of those greens would be what they call double greens with 2 flags in them, different colours, so you know which one to aim at, and with rules about who goes first so you don't kill each other. And so St Andrews, the home of golf, the most famous golf course in the world and in the history of the game, is actually 18 holes of golf, but it only has 11 greens because on 7 occasions there's a shared green where you have 2 flags. And so that's a links course. Beautiful. To simplify the set of golf clubs that we use, I can't think of another sport where you have a bag full of different sized implements that are supposed to be used in exactly the same way but for different purposes. So what's going on in a bag of clubs? You'll notice that they vary in length and they fall into broadly 2 categories. There are the woods, the long lumpy ones, and of course they're not made of wood anymore. They used to be. I did a whole apprenticeship learning how to repair the wooden ones, a skill long gone. But in fact, the woods are the long lumpy ones and they're the ones that go the farthest. So the longest hitting of the lot is called the driver. They're not all called drivers, and its other name is the one wood. Then there's a fairway wood or 2, which are the ones that you hit for distance off the ground. And that can be a 3 wood, a 5 wood, a 7 wood. And then it gets a little murky because they've now got almost an in-between category of clubs that between the woods and then the other clubs, which are called irons. And that's a rescue club or a hybrid club. And hybrid is a good name because they look like a bloated iron or a squashed wood. What's amusing historically is that golf clubs prior to the 19th century were all made out of wood, and they had very much this long-nosed shape. In fact, that's what they were called, long-nosed woods. So when the middle of the 19th century came along and there was a new naturally occurring rubber material called gutta percha that was starting to be used for golf balls, it was so hard that it would break the long-nosed woods. And so they started to make the heads in this more squat, very resilient shape. And only when, fast forward a century or so, when they had new materials and better production processes, that they were able to now go back to that long-nosed shape and make a club that's really a substitute for the long irons. The irons also stick out the bag different lengths, and they're numbered all the way from, say, 3 down to 9, and then it gets a little murky because the next one isn't a 10, it's called a pitching wedge. The next one, not an 11, it's called a gap wedge, and the next one, a sand wedge, and so on. Each of them, as they get shorter, get heavier and more angled so that the ball goes with the same swing higher and less distance, hopefully in a predictable way so that you can stand by your ball and say, I think I need my 9 iron, and actually have a chance of being right. So then finally, of course, you have a putter in the bag, which is what you use on the ground for bowling the ball, hopefully into the hole. So that's your set. Now, you don't need a fancy set of golf clubs. In fact, I wouldn't even buy a new set. I'd go to the Goodwill store and buy a nice used set of clubs. A man's club is about 43 inches long on the longest one, just to give you a rough guide. Maybe an inch shorter for the ladies' ones. And the men's ones, they often say regular on the shaft. They bend a little less than a ladies' club, which is a more flexible one. So unless you're particularly unusually built or unusually strong or weak, I would suggest that you go for a men's regular one for the gentlemen and a ladies' club for the ladies and just start playing. plenty of time ahead of you as you gain more competency to figure out if you need something special. The maximum number you can carry is 14. That didn't used to be a rule, but they were starting to worry that the manufacturers were going to keep adding clubs and say this is going to help you, and people would end up having too complex a choice. And so they limited it about 50 years ago to 14 clubs in the bag. On the rare occasion that the governing bodies have gone to the manufacturers and saying, do you mind very much if we drop it to 13? They've been gently shown the door because the manufacturers don't want to give up the sale of that one club. But in fact, when you first start, and I was one of those people, I started with what is called a half set, where I had 2 woods, 4 irons, and a putter. And I promise you, it's actually simpler and probably a smart way to start. It takes away a lot of the thinking. That narrow strip of land was called the Linkland, and it was also used not just for grazing sheep and cattle and playing golf, but also for commerce. In other words, people would go from town to town along the coast and they'd be using carts. Now, in the damp conditions in Scotland, those carts would leave ruts. And they, even in the 19th century, devised a wedge-like instrument. We call them wedges nowadays. This is called a niblick. And it's, you'll notice, quite a deep face with a short head. And the purpose was to get into those ruts, to get the ball out. And why would you subject yourself to that? Well, simply because the principal rule of golf is that you play the ball as it lies. Quite simply, you hit it there. You're not allowed to improve the lie in any way. You can't move grass except for the leaves and grass that are not fixed or growing. But you can't move anything that's in your way that's actually got roots and is held in place. You can't flatten it out, you can't move it, you can't pick up the ball, move it to a better location. You have to play the ball as it lies, hence the rut iron. That's the principal rule of golf. And so there'll be more rules coming in this series, and as you build your confidence, you'll realize that you're at least as familiar with the rules as anybody else on the course.